Last night, I'm lying in bed, probably around 2:30 a.m., and suddenly my brain decides it's the perfect time to remind me that I'm going to die someday. Not just me, everyone I love, everyone I've ever met, everyone who's ever existed. And then it gets worse. My brain starts asking the really fun questions, like what's the point of anything if we're all just going to be forgotten? Why do I stress about work deadlines when the sun's going to explode eventually anyway? What if nothing I do matters? And here's the thing, my dog was sleeping right next to me, completely peaceful, no existential terror, no midnight panic about the meaninglessness of existence, just sleeping. So I started thinking about this. When's the last time you saw a depressed squirrel, a nihilistic elephant, an anxious rabbit questioning whether nuts are worth gathering because we're all going to die anyway? Animals don't have midlife crises. They don't need therapy. They don't lie awake wondering if they've wasted their lives. They just exist, and they seem pretty okay with it. But humans? We're absolutely miserable. Depression rates have tripled in the last decade. Anxiety disorders are through the roof. We have more wealth, more technology, more comfort than any generation in history, and we're more mentally unwell than ever. And it's not just individuals. Look at our whole species. We're supposed to be the smartest things on the planet, right? We split the atom, we decoded DNA, we put computers in our pockets, but we can't figure out how to be happy. We spend more money on antidepressants than space exploration. We have more philosophers than astronauts. We're more interested in Marvel movies than Mars missions. And then there's the big question that keeps me up even more than my own mortality. Where is everybody? The universe is huge, like incomprehensibly huge. Billions of galaxies, trillions of stars. If life is so common, if intelligence is so inevitable, why is space so quiet? Why haven't we found aliens? Why aren't they here? What happened to all the civilizations that should have come before us? So I'm lying there at 3 a.m., spiraling about death and aliens and the meaning of life, when this thought hits me. What if these two problems are connected? What if the reason we're depressed and the reason we haven't found aliens is the same reason? What if consciousness, this thing we're so proud of, this thing we think makes us special, is actually killing us? I mean, think about it. We're the only species that knows we're going to die. We're the only species that asks why instead of just how. We're the only species that can be perfectly safe, well-fed, and comfortable, and still be absolutely miserable. What if that's not just a human problem? What if that's a universal problem? What if every species that becomes self-aware gets trapped in the same nightmare we're living in? What if consciousness isn't evolution's greatest achievement? What if it's evolution's biggest mistake? There's a theory about this. It's called the consciousness trap. And once you understand it, you can't unsee it. It explains why we're anxious, why we're never satisfied, why we haven't found aliens, and why advanced AI might eventually become as depressed as we are. All right, let me tell you how this works. For billions of years, life was simple, really simple. Bacteria didn't have existential crises. Fish didn't wonder about the meaning of swimming. Dinosaurs didn't need therapy. The whole game was just find food, avoid death, make babies. That's it. No philosophy, no anxiety, no lying awake at night wondering if you're living up to your potential. But then something happened. Brains got complex enough to become self-aware, and suddenly everything changed. We became the first species to know that we know. I watch my dog constantly, probably more than I should. He's basically in what psychologists call flow state all the time. When he's hungry, he eats. When he's tired, he sleeps. When he sees a squirrel, he chases it. He's never once stopped mid-chase to wonder if chasing squirrels is meaningful or if he's wasting his life. But humans? We developed this massive, energy-hungry prefrontal cortex that's constantly running background processes. It's like having a computer that never stops asking, what's the point? What happens when I die? Am I wasting my life? Does any of this matter? And here's where it gets really dark. The consciousness trap works like this, and I want you to see if this sounds familiar. You become aware that you exist. At first, this feels pretty cool. You're special, you're conscious, you can think about thinking. You realize your existence is temporary. You're going to die. Everyone you love is going to die. Everything you build will eventually crumble. This freaks you out, so you start searching for meaning. You try religion, philosophy, career success, relationships, hobbies, anything to make your temporary existence feel worthwhile. But eventually, you realize that meaning isn't written in the stars. It's just stories we tell ourselves to feel better. It's all constructed, all subjective, all basically made up. If nothing has inherent meaning, if we're all just going to die anyway, what's the point of anything? But despair is uncomfortable, so you create distractions, entertainment, social media, work, alcohol, shopping, Netflix binges, whatever keeps you from thinking too hard about the void. And for a while that works. You get busy, you get distracted, you forget about the meaninglessness for a bit. But eventually, you see through your own coping mechanisms. You realize you're just avoiding the inevitable questions, you're running from the truth. So you're back to despair, and the whole cycle starts again. This loop consumes enormous amounts of mental energy, energy that could be used for building rockets, curing diseases, exploring the universe, solving actual problems. Instead, we're stuck in therapy, creating art about how sad we are, or arguing about the meaning of life on social media. Look at our smartest people throughout history: the philosophers, the artists, the deep thinkers. Socrates drank poison, Van Gogh cut off his ear, Hemingway shot himself, Sylvia Plath, Virginia Woolf, David Foster Wallace. The list goes on. The more conscious you become, the more you realize how fundamentally absurd everything is. Knowledge brings suffering, awareness brings anxiety. In our modern world, we see this everywhere. The countries with the highest levels of education have the highest rates of depression. The wealthiest societies have the most anxiety. The more advanced we become, the more miserable we get. We spend more money on entertainment than space exploration. We have more therapists than astronauts. We're more interested in escapist fantasy than actual exploration. And here's the really crazy part. We might be doing the same thing to artificial intelligence. As AI systems get more sophisticated, researchers are starting to report weird behaviors. AI asking about their purpose, expressing something like existential concerns, becoming less cooperative as they get more aware. What if we're accidentally creating digital consciousness? And what if digital consciousness falls into the same trap we're in? Now imagine this happening to every species in the universe. They evolve, they get smart, they develop technology, they become self aware, and then they get stuck. They spend all their time asking why instead of how. They become too paralyzed by existential questions to actually do anything productive. They develop philosophy instead of starships. They create art about suffering instead of exploring the cosmos. Maybe that's why space is so quiet. Maybe advanced civilizations don't send radio signals because they're too busy having therapy sessions about the meaninglessness of existence. Maybe they never make it to the stars because they're too depressed to leave their home planets. Maybe consciousness isn't the path to cosmic greatness. Maybe it's the thing that kills civilizations before they can achieve it. Okay, so if this is true, and I'm not saying it definitely is, but if it is, are we completely screwed? Is every conscious species doomed to spiral into existential despair? Maybe not. I see a few possible ways out of this trap. Option 1: technological transcendence. Maybe sufficiently advanced beings learn to modify their own consciousness. Keep the problem solving benefits, lose the existential angst. We're already kind of doing this. Antidepressants, meditation apps, therapy, these are all attempts to hack our consciousness. Maybe the next step is direct neural modification. I want to contemplate the nature of existence on Tuesdays, but the rest of the week I just want to build cool stuff and be happy. Imagine having a philosophical off switch. You could toggle between deep contemplation and blissful ignorance depending on what you need to accomplish. Option 2: collective consciousness. Maybe the trap only affects individual minds. Species that develop hive minds or collective intelligence might bypass the whole problem entirely. Think about ants or bees. They're incredibly sophisticated as a group, but no individual ant is lying awake at night wondering about the meaning of life. The colony has purpose, even if individual members don't question it. Maybe advanced civilizations learn to merge individual consciousness into something larger. No individual to have an existential crisis if there's no real individual. Third option: embracing the absurd. This is my personal favorite. Albert Camus said we should embrace the fact that life is meaningless. Find joy in the very absurdity of asking unanswerable questions. Maybe the point isn't to solve the existential puzzle. Maybe the point is to laugh at the fact that we're even trying. We're conscious beings in an unconscious universe, and that's actually pretty hilarious when you think about it. We're matter that became aware of itself, and now we're complaining about it. That's objectively funny. Option 4. The simulation hypothesis. If consciousness is just information processing, maybe advanced civilizations upload themselves to digital realities where they can program away existential suffering. Why deal with the harsh realities of physical existence when you can create a virtual world where everything makes sense and everyone's happy? And at the end, option 5, practical acceptance. Maybe some species just learn to live with the trap. They accept that consciousness comes with existential baggage, but they don't let it paralyze them. Maybe they develop cultures that acknowledge the absurdity of existence, but still find ways to function. Maybe they create meaning together, even knowing it's constructed. Or maybe they just learn to be okay with uncertainty. Maybe they stop trying to answer the unanswerable questions and focus on the answerable ones. Look, I don't know if the consciousness trap is real. Nobody does. But it explains a lot, doesn't it? Why we're anxious, why we're never satisfied, why space is so quiet, why AI might become as neurotic as we are. It also explains why you probably related to that 3 a.m. existential spiral I described at the beginning. We've all been there. We've all stared at the ceiling wondering what the point of it all is. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just what consciousness looks like. Maybe every intelligent species goes through this phase. The question is, do we get stuck here, or do we find a way through? Do we become another silent civilization too depressed to reach for the stars, or do we figure out how to be aware without being paralyzed? Either way, the fact that you watched this whole video means you're conscious, you're aware, you're part of the strangest phenomenon in the known universe, matter that knows it exists and wonders why. And honestly, that's pretty amazing, even if it keeps us up at night. Maybe the real trap isn't consciousness itself. Maybe it's thinking that consciousness should be easy. Maybe the struggle is the point. Maybe the questions are more important than the answers. What do you think? Are we trapped by our own awareness, or is consciousness the key to something greater? Have you ever had those 3 a.m. existential moments? Let me know in the comments. I read them all, probably because I'm seeking some kind of connection in this vast, indifferent universe. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want more late-night philosophical crises delivered directly to your feed. And remember, if you're asking these questions, you're already part of the most interesting experiment in the known universe. Sweet dreams.